10 movies of 2012. It is finally time to count down the very best, most beloved, darling, wonderful, fantastic, enjoyable, entertaining films of 2012. And this has been an absolutely incredible year for movies. So much great entertainment in one year. It's one of those years you look back on with your grandchildren and you're like, Sonny, 2012 was one heck of a movie year. Yeah, it's been pretty much like that. Before we begin, I'd like to say that I don't hand out 5 stars very lightly. I take that very seriously. It's 5 stars is the perfect grade, you know? That's a movie's gotta be pretty perfect to get that grade. That's why perhaps not every single movie in here is gonna get 5 stars, just so you know. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the movies I've not yet seen. These movies have not been shown in Sweden during 2012, so I haven't been able to see them. And they include American Mary, Django Unchained, Jack Reacher, Les Miserables, Red Dawn, Room 237, and Zero Dark 30. Okay, now let's get to the honorable mentions. These are all the movies that were awarded 4 stars, but that did not make it to my top 10 list. And my first honorable mention is going to be The Expendables 2. This movie, simply put, is an 80s action fan's wet dream. Just look at all the names on that poster. All these classic action heroes kicking ass in one movie at the same time? Get out of here. It was not well written, but it was a lot of fun, and most importantly, it kicked a lot of serious ass. So that's why The Expendables 2 is my first honorable mention. And then we've got Halo, Forward Unto Dawn. I know this one was technically sort of a mini-series, I guess you might say, but it was released in blu-ray format as a standalone feature film. So this was a machinima film. It was made to promote Halo 4, and I was not expecting much from this one. I thought it was going to be like a couple of kids with cameras running around in Halo outfits, but it was really solid. It built a lot of character early on, and then when you'd gotten to know your characters, that's when Master Chief stepped in and the action really ramped up near the end. If you're a Halo fan and you enjoyed Halo 4, it's a no-brainer. Go watch it. And then we've got The Girl, starring Sienna Miller and Toby Jones. This is a television movie about Tippi Hedren and her relationship to Alfred Hitchcock during the making of The Birds and Marnie. She came out and claimed that allegedly that Hitchcock was a real creep and that he had made sexual advances against her during the making of these movies. And that's the basis for this movie. Again, this is another one I was not expecting much from, but it was really, really good. Really solid acting, very interesting for movie fans and Hitchcock fans, and I think the subject matter is very dramatic and poignant, so it was well worth a watch in my opinion. And after that we've got, I shit you not, Katy Perry, Part of Me. I know. This is another one that I was definitely not expecting to have among my honorable mentions, but if you go beyond the surface of this documentary, beyond all the glitzy Katy Perry pop star stuff, and this is a really interesting documentary. It actually speaks a lot about show business in general and the things you'll have to sacrifice and the things you can gain by becoming a big pop star in showbiz these days. So it was actually a pretty raw, sort of naked portrait of the person that is Katy Perry, and I was not expecting it to be that powerful. So give it a chance. If you're willing, you might be as pleasantly surprised as I was. And yet another documentary that received an honorable mention, and this is probably the best documentary I've seen in 2012. It's called Side by Side. Keanu Reeves, of all people, goes around interviewing famous filmmakers about different film formats. Now that physical film is being challenged more and more by digital film and digital film cameras, what's the best way to go? It's a very fascinating movie documentary, and they always balance the issue very well in this one, I thought. At one moment they could convince you that traditional physical film strips are the best thing in the world, and at another moment I thought digital high-definition cameras were the greatest thing ever invented. So it's a really, really fascinating, really great documentary. If you have the slightest interest in cinema or filmmaking or films whatsoever, give this one a watch. It's well worth it. I also awarded 4 stars to Superman vs. the Elite, another one from DC Animated Films. They always make really great films, and this is no exception. Superman faces a group of so-called heroes called the Elite who end up murdering villains. So Superman has to stand tall for his moral rights, and it's very powerful stuff. It definitely goes beyond your average sort of animated feature film. And my last honorable mention is gonna go to The Tall Man. This is from the director of Martyrs, Pascal Laugier, starring Jessica Biel. I'll be the first to admit I am not a Jessica Biel fan at all, not in the slightest, but this is probably the best performance I've seen her give so far. It's about a woman whose child is kidnapped and she ventures out into the dark woods to find out about the mysterious tall man. This movie has a lot of twists and turns, a lot of surprises, and it's definitely not what you would call a straight horror film. So don't go in expecting a slasher bloodbath. It's more of a mystery. It's more like an M. Night Shyamalan movie than a bloody slasher flick. Okay, those were all my honorable mentions. Now it's time to get to the top 10 list. At number 10, Argo. Ben Affleck might not have proven his acting chops recently, but he has definitely proved his directing chops. This man can really direct a solid, dramatic thriller. And Argo is just that, a solid, interesting, dramatic thriller that's based on true events. Right at the tail end of the 1970s, 6 Americans were held hostage in politically erupting Iran, and the CIA had to come up with some kind of plot to rescue these people. And that plot was staging a fake science fiction movie by the name of Argo. This movie is quite gripping, it's very intense, it's a real nail-biter from start to finish, but it's also got a lot of humor, and you really get a feeling for the characters as well. They're all convincing, believable people, and you always feel their plight, their joy, and their sadness throughout this ordeal. Perhaps Zero Dark 30 has eclipsed this movie for the Oscars, but I still think it's one of the best ones of 2012 for certain. Most of this actually happened, even though a few details might have been dramatized for the movie. But it is one of those unbelievably true life stories, and it proves to be both tense, interesting, and funny. So that's Argo, number 10. Number 9. Snow White and the Huntsman. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a controversial pick for one of the greatest films of 2012, but hey, I loved it. Not only is this movie dark, epic, thrilling, it's got a wonderful performance from Charlize Theron as the seething queen. It's also an absolutely incredible visual stunner. You can tell the director had a real vision and a real mind for a visual setting. It's an absolutely gorgeous film from top to bottom. Very well laid out, and I really love Chris Hemsworth in the role as the drunken, grumpy huntsman. He was born to play that role. Just the way he narrates the movie with his Scottish accent, I just love that. Gives me chills for some reason. Now I know this movie's helmed by Kristen Stewart, but I would dare say that it still works because Charlize is so wonderful, Chris Hemsworth is so wonderful, and Snow White really acts as sort of a bystander. Things play off of her, and she's just kind of there to react to them and play around in this beautiful visual world. If there's only one thing about the movie except for Kristen Stewart that I found a little bit annoying or tiresome, it would be the seven dwarfs in this one. I think they actually start out as 8 dwarfs in this one. Might be sort of a spoiler warning there. Too late. Anyway, Snow White and the Huntsman is the dark sort of action thriller take on Snow White, and it's sort of the fantasy adaptation I've always been longing to see, and I really hope that they continue to make these epic dark action takes on these fairy tales. So that's Snow White and the Huntsman. Coming in at number 8, Skyfall. I'm gonna begin by saying I don't think Skyfall was better than Casino Royale. However, in the pantheon of Bond films, it would probably stand up for a good long while as one of the very best ones. Sam Mendes has a real talent for combining a solid action thriller with all the little sort of Bond nuggets that people will expect. The movie stands on its own, being beautifully photographed, action-packed, interesting, with a compelling bad guy, and all the romantic interests, interesting locations, and all you could want from a solid action thriller. But then you've got this layer of Bondness going on, from the absolutely fantastic opening title sequence all the way through to the surprise ending. Skyfall has a lot of winks and nods for Bond fans. I think both new and old Bond fans alike will enjoy this one. But it might be a fun surprise in particular for older Bond fans who've wanted their James Bond back. Well, this is pretty much as good as it gets without hiring Sean Connery, I think. It's also really great to see that the film is incredibly well written. You've got this incredible dynamic tension between M and James Bond that becomes more personal than it's ever been. But at the same time, the movie can be enjoyable in a lighter way, and it can be a little bit humorous as well. But it is one of the most intense Bond films made to date. And I would love to see this one with some true James Bond fans. The best compliment I can give to Skyfall, I think, is that it really makes me want to go back and watch all the original Bond films. That's when you know it's working. But at the same time, it's a rousing action thriller that will stand on its own 2 feet for a long time to come. Bond is back in a big way. Happy 50th anniversary, Mr. Bond. Cheers to you. Number 7. Chronicle. Chronicle came in early in 2012, and as soon as I saw it, I knew it was a sure contender for one of the best movies of the year. Chronicle is about 3 normal teenage boys who are playing around in the ground when they happen upon some mysterious artifact. This strange glowing artifact grants them telekinetic powers, and they begin by moving very small objects using only their mind. But their powers soon grow like a flexing muscle, and they are able to move bigger and bigger objects. But at the same time, they're going through all the stuff normal teenagers are going through. And that turmoil, confusion, sadness, anger, and rage may just explode and become a lethal weapon. What Chronicle does so well is not only build the character's journey literally from one small speck to a huge encounter at the end, we also really get to know our characters well, and they feel like solid people. They feel written like real teenagers with real emotions, real problems, real conflicts, but they also play off each other like real teenagers, and that's a rare thing. It's cool to see a movie that doesn't condescend. It kind of admits that teenagers are morons, especially male teenagers, and this is probably what might happen if 3 regular teenagers were granted extraordinary powers. I sure don't think they would turn into Superman overnight. They would do some pretty goofy and some pretty dangerous stuff. I wouldn't really say that there is a main character in this movie, which is quite interesting. They're all sort of main characters. All 3 of them sort of share equal screen time. They all have their motivations. But we do follow Andrew, one of the 3 guys who's granted these powers, and we do get to see a lot of his turmoil, a lot of his family life, and we see that he's struggling with a lot of things, and he definitely doesn't have a perfect existence. Of course, all of that within him spirals out of control, but he's also the one who learns to use the powers faster than anybody else. So that's a really dangerous recipe for catastrophe. I'm reminded of both Anakin Skywalker, Akira, and Superman when I watch this movie. And there are a few clear nods to movies such as this, but it's completely its own movie. It's got its own visual style, it's got its own characters, it's got its own development, and all that. There are no red flowing capes about this, and that's what I like about it too. Being that it's sort of handheld camera style, and that we follow these characters so intimately from the very moment that they are granted these powers to the moment of pure catastrophe, it becomes all the more powerful and potent. We really feel like we get to know these guys, and it becomes all the more involving once stuff starts going down. If there's only one minor complaint I have about Chronicle, the budget does show up on occasion. Like, the special effects work doesn't always look entirely convincing, but it's good enough that you can stay within the realm of the movie without feeling utterly distracted. I'm just glad to see characters that are believable, whether it's a sci-fi movie or not. But if you're a superhero fan, then you've got a bonus in this movie. It's incredibly powerful stuff, and it builds to an absolutely explosive climax. Chronicle's really evidence that you don't need to have a huge name director or an enormous budget to pull off a great movie. Number 6. The Avengers. A project like The Avengers is pretty crazy. You really need someone with talent to pull it off, and Joss Whedon is just the right person for the job. He knows these characters intimately. He's worked on comic books before. He's at one hand the ultimate super geek, but he also wants to make a good movie that can do these characters justice and lend it some kind of credible, real dramatic weight. And that's what's so great about the Avengers. The thing that surprised me and delighted me more than anything was not the action. It was the way the movie was scripted and the way that the characters interact with each other. Every single major character in this movie gets their own moment. They all have their own motivations, they all have their own scene, they all have their own reason to be participating, and bringing them all together in one movie doesn't feel like an excuse. It's not like, oh man, there's a catastrophe, we've got to take these 6 heroes and they got to save the world. The entire movie is actually about these characters reconciling with each other and, frankly, not getting along very well. And that's what's really interesting to see. What happens when extraordinary superheroes don't get along with each other. But then you've got some real solid action as well, which is basically what everybody came to see. And it's a comic book nerd's wet dream. This movie really awakens the 11-year-old in everybody. Doesn't matter if you're familiar with the Avengers, if you've seen the previous movies or not. There's something here for everybody. There's humor, there's action, there's story. If I had to compare the Avengers to any of the previous films about these characters, it would be the first Iron Man. First Iron Man had a great blend of action and humor. It was basically a non-stop movie. The Avengers takes all that, manages to juggle all these characters very well, adds a convincing layer of drama, and works. Because Joss Whedon knows what he's up to. When you know where the drama is going and you just want to jump into the action, then the movie can feel a little bit tedious. Just a little tiny bit. But it's worth watching every single minute. And leads to one of the greatest, most entertaining action sequences in recent movie history. Simply put, I think The Avengers was the most entertaining movie of 2012. It was the most fun I ever had in a movie theater this year. Are there flaws with the story? Yes. Are there minor flaws to the pacing? Sure. But it doesn't get more rousing than this, more entertaining in the true humor action sense of the word. It's not the most elaborately scripted movie, but it is some of the most fun I've had in a movie theater. Number 5. Lovely Molly. Lovely Molly came as a huge surprise to me. I've seen my fair share of demonic possession movies, and let's be honest, most of them are pure crap. There are tons of Exorcist knockoffs, with girls being possessed by demons and priests shouting Latin phrases, but Lovely Molly isn't like that. It's kind of a drama horror movie. It's very psychological and incredibly intense. It's one of the most suggestive movies I've watched in years. It's about a young woman called Molly who moves back to her old father's house when she begins to fall ill. She begins to see things, she begins to hear things, and we slowly get to know little tiny bits about her past, and we learn that she may have suffered some pretty horrendous stuff that in turn may be affecting her now. It might be that there's actually something supernatural going on, or it might be just a purely psychological movie, this one. We're not entirely sure. But that's what I liked about The Exorcist 2, is that movie, although it's very blunt, doesn't necessarily state outright that this has to be a demonic force. If you discount the most absurd things in that movie, you could still say it was just about a very, very sick girl. And that pretty much goes for Lovely Molly too, and I love those kind of films. As we go along with the journey, we learn more and more about our characters, but the horror also ramps up, begins to intensify, and go nearer and nearer the edge and the abyss, and that's superbly done in this movie. Besides the fact that the actors are really good and that the characters are really well fleshed out, and there aren't a lot of characters in this movie, there are basically 4 or 5 characters in the whole movie. I love that she's isolated in this movie, and it really makes this movie scary. There's absolutely excellent sound design in this movie, some of the creepiest sounds I've heard in a movie in a very long time, and they do a lot to increase the horror and the tension in this movie. I dare you to watch this movie alone, when it's about a character who is alone and starts to hear things and see things in the shadows. So Lovely Molly came as a huge surprise. I'd name it my personal favorite horror movie of the year. I know a lot of people prefer Cabin in the Woods, but I don't think Cabin in the Woods was quite a top 10 movie. I think it's more of sort of a wink at horror movies. I don't see Cabin in the Woods as being that sort of genuine horror movie. It's too sort of self-referential, I guess you might say. But give Lovely Molly a chance if you are looking for something spooky. Watch it alone and crank up the sound, and if you are disappointed and if you aren't spooked by the end of it, perhaps you need something with a bit more blood in it. Because that's the only thing I guess you might say this movie's missing. But horror movies can be psychological too, and this one certainly is, and it works beautifully. Number 4. The Divide. Xavier Gens has proven to be a really powerful director. Unless you count Hitman, of course, which was a total debacle. He's made some really startling, interesting, and dark movies. The Divide begins with the end. Just as atomic bombs are being hurled all over the United States of America, that's when a group of survivors go down into a shelter and manage to survive the initial blast. But now they have to survive each other. I love movies like these. I like to call them locked in a tin can movies. It's extreme situation movies where people are forced to deal with each other in order to survive. Movies like Frozen and The Ruins. This movie's very dark, very bleak, quite tough to watch at times, but it's very psychological. It asks the question, what would happen if you were locked in a tin can with just a few people and had to survive there? What are people willing to do to stay alive? What will they do to each other? What will they do to themselves? All that stuff. And that really comes through in this movie. It goes to very dark places, but it's how do you remain human? How do you keep the fire burning when there's absolutely nothing to look forward to? When all you know is gone and removed and reduced to ashes, what do you do to stay alive? That's all true in this movie, and they go through some pretty intense psychological, physical, violent, sexual, worrisome stuff in this movie, so it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But I thought it was very, very interesting and very, very entertaining, despite the bleak subject matter. So that's why The Divide turned out to be quite a surprise this year, and that's why it's on the list. Number 3. Dread. I saw this one very late in the game, and I am glad I did, because this movie is phenomenal. When I first got the news that Karl Urban was going to play Judge Dredd, I was like, Karl Urban? Really? Well, that should be pretty much a fiasco. It's going to be worse than the Sylvester Stallone version, I'm sure. But it turned out to be a case of pure Daniel Craig, because this guy can really pull off Judge Dredd. The thing about this movie that becomes apparent very quickly is that it's a no-nonsense action movie. And I do mean no nonsense. There's a very, very simple plot, very few characters, no sidetracks, no romance, no drama, no comedy, no nothing. Just a pure, balls to the wall, kick-ass, hard R, bloody, tough action movie. And I love my hard R action movies. Perhaps it's a guy thing, but sometimes you just need some testosterone. You just need something that'll bypass all that nonsense and just go for the throat. It's just a pure 90-minute action ride. On the other hand, this movie does have some pretty visually interesting sequences as well. The movie's about a 200-story flat block full of drug heads that are distributing a drug called slow-mo. That drug makes your mind believe that speed is going about a 100th of its regular interval or something like that. So it's as if you're experiencing life in slow motion. And that gives way to some very, very interesting visual sequences. Basically, the only plot for this movie is Judge Dredd is taking young Anderson, a rookie, out on her assessment. So they go to this 200-story building that's full of drug heads, gangsters, basically all manner of criminals you can imagine. And they're locked in there, and then the action commences. That's it. Nothing else. No sidetracks, no nothing. I just love how pure this movie is, how unrelenting, how violent, because it's very, very violent. This is a hard R movie. We're talking blood, guts, all manner of crazy deaths. It was also interesting to see how Dredd impresses Anderson and how Anderson impresses Dredd at times. I think you will quickly be able to discern if this is a movie for you. If you enjoy pure action, if you enjoy hard R movies, then this is for you. They save the dialogue, they hold the drama, but Karl Urban is a really dedicated Dredd. He's got the voice, he's got the chin, he's got the build, and he's definitely backed by a great script and some wonderful direction. And that makes Dredd my number 1 action movie of 2012. Number 2. Prometheus. For the longest time, this one was number 1 on my list. It was up there on the number 1 spot, and I was dead sure it was going to stay there all the way until the end. Then something happened. I bought the Blu-rays of my top 2 movies, and I watched them both at home again. And while it was still an absolutely fantastic movie, it didn't have quite the same impact as it did the first time. And I realized that this may be the movie with the grandest ideas. I admire this movie more than anyone in 2012, and it is very well composed, well directed, and well filmed, of course. but it doesn't have that pure entertainment value, and that's why it did not make number one. It's not as heart-stopping as it was on first viewing. However, there is still a lot of things to admire about this film. I've heard the actors take a lot of crap and all manner of reviews, but I like them all, pretty much. Except perhaps some of the secondary characters. But you got Noomi Rapace, Michael Fassbender, Charlize Theron, fantastic performance. Idris Elba. On the whole, it's a stellar cast. Oh, Guy Pearce as well. I don't think Guy Pearce was the highlight of the movie. Let me put it that way. I think the point of Prometheus is not to be this great action, horror, sci-fi movie. It's definitely not like Alien in a lot of ways. It's got a completely different scope. It's got a completely different tone. And I think it's got a completely different purpose. Whereas Alien was sort of an experiment, sort of sci-fi horror movie that worked, and worked beautifully. Prometheus has taken that sort of grain of sand that is Alien, and it showed us the beach and the sea and all the possibilities that stretch beyond the sea. And I have to give credit to Ridley Scott, not only for being such a brave director, because that's the best word I can describe him as being, but for living with this project for so long, for nurturing this project, and for seeing it realized in such a beautiful way. Absolutely gorgeously well photographed and realized film that asks a lot of great big questions, but at the same time dares to be pretty blunt and pretty visceral at times. Juggling those two things cannot be easy. At the same time, it's got a lot of pressure from filmmakers and fans expecting another Alien movie, but that's not what he delivers. This is a lateral movie, takes place in the same part of the universe, but on a completely different planet. This planet, however, does share a lot of similar traits to the one seen in the original Alien. So it is plausible that Alien is one of several things that happen after Prometheus, just not on the exact same location. It's rare that a movie can ask such big questions but retain the humanity of the characters, not become too preachy and not become too boring either. It's incredibly intense, and what struck me about the movie the first time I saw it was how well he juggles different levels of intensity. There's almost no scene in the movie where there's just one thing going on. There are always these separate plot lines going on, and you're never quite sure what's going to happen next. And when you're revisiting the movie, then you can go back and explore different theories and different ideas about what you believe might be going on about the movie. That's what's wonderful too. He dares to leave the movie almost completely open-ended. There are very few explanations to exactly what is going on and exactly what is the purpose of what's going on here. And we can only guess, which I think is probably for the best. Ridley knows exactly what to divulge, what to keep, and that makes for a much more compelling movie. I think Prometheus stands on its own 2 feet. I think it's a movie we're going to look back at in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and still be pretty marveled by. That is my hope, at least. But for now, you can just watch it as a damn good science fiction movie, and I can tell you it has never, ever been this hard to go back and watch the original Alien before. And the best movie of 2012 is... The Dark Knight Rises. Yeah, no surprise, right? Man alive, this movie. Christopher Nolan is one of those directors that is so ingenious. When I'd lost all hope in him, he comes back and not only surprises me, but outdoes himself with The Dark Knight Rises. You know, the early buzz for this movie was not getting me hyped up. I saw the trailers coming in and I was like, okay, it's another Christopher Nolan Batman movie. Well, that's really great, of course. It's great that he's ending the trilogy, but I wasn't cheering for the movie, you know what I mean? Tom Hardy as Bane, some mumbling second-rate bad guy. You had Anne Hathaway's Catwoman. I guess that's pretty cool, but is she gonna be able to live up to Christopher Nolan Catwoman? All my fears were quenched when I saw the movie. This movie is probably the most intense movie-going experience I've had, at least since Inception. It's one of those, I guess you might want to call it a nail biter, but it's more like a heart attack, really. It's like experiencing multiple heart attacks, but at the same time you're so emotionally invested in this movie that you're close to tears, cheering your hero on, and still enjoying every single scene with the bad guy. Not to mention Catwoman. Anne Hathaway as Selena Kyle in Catwoman, she just nailed that performance. She was so phenomenal. I want a whole series of Catwoman films right now. I want the Nolan brothers to write them, please, and I want Anne Hathaway to reprise her role as Catwoman. I was not expecting this movie to be of such an enormous scope. There is so much online here, and our hero really does fall before he can rise again. It really is a dark descent. And what this movie does that's really, really rare these days is that this is clearly the concluding chapter to a trilogy. The movie expects you to have seen the previous films. That's pretty daring, but it works out great. It picks up 8 years after The Dark Knight, and it doesn't jump into action straight away. You got the introduction of Bane, a marvelous plane heist takeover, but then the movie actually takes a good long while to reintroduce the world, to reintroduce the characters, to show you just what has happened to Bruce Wayne, show you just what's happened to Gotham City, what's the deal now, how has Harvey Dent influenced the city, and that's really rare and really, really interesting. It does take a little bit of patience, especially when you're watching it for the second, third, fourth, fifth time, but I think it's wonderful. That's what sets these films apart. They dare to do things that other films wouldn't. If any other director would have directed this, I'm sure we would have had 10 action scenes in the first hour alone, but no, we build it up, get to know just how depressed and lonesome Bruce Wayne really is, and then we get a magnificent second half that is just heart attack after heart attack after heart attack. I was also incredibly surprised by just how emotional this movie is. I was not expecting to basically be left in tears by a Batman movie, but that is precisely what I was. Michael Caine and Christian Bale in particular in this movie are just so phenomenal. I don't know, there's little else to say. They're just great. I was so surprised by it, and that's when it really works too. When you're surprised by the emotionality of something, that's when it really hits you. And I know that's for me. That's when I'm most likely to start bawling. So that was great. All due credit to the cast here. They're phenomenal. They're great actors, really, truly. The last thing I'll say about The Dark Knight Rises, because everybody knows just how phenomenal the movie is. If you don't agree, then go back and watch some Tim Burton Batman films. I guess Christopher Nolan's not up everybody's alley, but that's okay. But I will say this about the movie that I also find astonishing every time I watch it. This movie, like I said, is clearly the third part of a trilogy, and it makes reference to both the first and second installments and utilizes them in the narrative of the film in a very potent and very great way. That's also what surprised me. This is not just Batman Part 3. This is the last part of a whole. And now, and even though there were flaws to Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, as with any movie, now when you see them as a whole and you see what it's building to, that sort of validifies and strengthens everything that was going on in the first two movies, and in Batman Begins in particular. So I'm sure that watching the trilogy from start to finish on a dark rainy night is only gonna be even more astounding now that Mr. Nolan has concluded his amazing Batman trilogy. That was my number one pick for the year of 2012, my favorite movie of the year. What's been your favorite movie? Comment below and let me know. Before I leave you though, I promised I'd share my most anticipated movies of 2013, and that's what I'll do right now. Although I can't wait to see movies like Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, The Lords of Salem, Godzilla, Maleficent, and of course Kick-Ass 2, my top 5 most anticipated movies of 2013 are Carrie, coming in at number 5. Looks great, great director. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I just hope Chloe Grace Moretz can pull this off. Then we've got Maniac, starring Elijah Wood. Looks fantastic. This is one of those few instances where I think both the original and the remake can be really great films in their own right. Don't let me down. Third place, we've got Man of Steel, Zack Snyder, Christopher Nolan. Dark, gritty, dramatic, powerful, looks great. This is the Superman I've been waiting for all my life. It's finally coming true, and I can finally leave that stinking turd Superman Returns behind me. Number 2, Machete Kills. This movie is gonna be awesome. Look at the cast list. I'm serious. Go look at the cast list. I'll wait. Okay, that is an amazing cast. That is a freaking phenomenal cast, and I love the first Machete. It's only gotten better the more I've watched it. It's so much fun, action-packed, just a great throwback movie. I love it to death. And number 1, perhaps not surprisingly, is gonna be The Evil Dead. Posters promise the most terrifying film you will ever experience. That might be overreaching, I think, but I've always imagined what was it like to see Evil Dead in theaters when it was new. I mean, I would have pissed myself. That movie has so much potential. It looks so intense, bloody, tough, amazing stuff. If the trailers are any indication, then this movie is gonna have horrible acting, but it's gonna make up for it with tons and tons of gore. And that is what I want from an Evil Dead movie. Not the campy stuff, I want the red stuff. Thanks for watching, this has been my 2012 recap. I'll be back with a big old Christmas haul DVD and Blu-ray update sometime soon. Until then, watch tons of great movies in 2013 and I'll see you soon. Bye.